prepping for what we will hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell as he steps to the mic tomorrow, wrapping up their two-day policy meeting. And for more on what we should expect to hear from him, I want to bring on Yahoo Finance's Fed reporter Brian Cheung, who has the details on that front. Brian?
Well, Zach, with interest rates already near zero, the Federal Reserve isn't expected to announce anything big at the conclusion of its FOMC meeting tomorrow afternoon. Keep in mind that all eyes are on whether or not the Fed could provide any sort of forward guidance on how long they would hold rates near zero or embark on a stated pace of quantitative easing, that is asset purchases. But a lot of those on Wall Street are saying they might not expect to hear any of an announcement from the Fed on those two fronts until maybe later in this year, the July or September meetings perhaps, which means that tomorrow could be a pretty uneventful FOMC meeting. What will be closely watched, however, is that summary of economic projections. This is a quarterly release the Fed usually drops. They actually skip the March release because of all the COVID-19 related craziness that was going on. But the Federal Reserve does plan on releasing a new update tomorrow that will include projections from the FOMC members on where they see interest rates, where they see US GDP, unemployment, or inflation, at least through 2022. That could be a really interesting roadmap for where we go from here. One important caveat, though, however, is that Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell in his press conference tomorrow afternoon might try to downplay what those projections are saying. Keep in mind that trying to project what's going to happen in the economy in the next few years is as effectively the same thing as trying to project what happens with the virus here in the United States, in which case, honestly, your guess and my guess is just as good as the Federal Reserve's guess. So interesting to see how Chairman Powell might be communicating that in tomorrow's decision. But again, all eyes on that SEP release as opposed to any sort of change on the policy decision with rates already near zero. Zach?
And the other thing too, Brian, and first of all, just shocked to hear you even use the term uneventful. I've known you for a while now, never heard you use that when we talk about Fed meetings. But when we dig into what he might be saying more, it's clear he's been applying a lot of pressure on the fiscal side, kind of trying to shift the focus off of what monetary levers could be pulled here. Are we expecting him to maybe ramp up on that theme as we've heard him really double down on it in the last few public appearances that he's had?
Well, uneventful, I guess, is relative because the Federal Reserve has launched all these bazookas, all thrown every kitchen sink that they possibly could have in late March and in early April. But as you mentioned, his words will be very closely watched within the context of maybe monetary policy trying to kick the ball over to the fiscal side of the court here. So when you talk about whether or not fiscal policymakers need to do something else, keep in mind there was chatter among economic advisors like Stephen Moore that the positive jobs report that we got last Friday may have actually released the Congress from the onus of needing to provide more fiscal stimulus. But then you have Kevin Hassett from the economic team again in the White House saying we do actually support a phase 4. So I think you might try to see Jerome Powell tomorrow afternoon tilt the scale, if you will, towards trying to get more fiscal support, because as we know, the support is not necessarily as important now as it will be during the recovery when everyone starts to leave their apartments, get back to work, and whether or not those jobs will be there when they do ultimately get released from those stay-at-home orders.
All right, well, we'll see what he has to say. A reminder to stay tuned to Yahoo Finance tomorrow for all of our Fed coverage as we cover that rate decision and what other announcements might come from Fed Chair Jay Powell. Our coverage of that begins right here on the ticker at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. But Brian Cheung, appreciate you bringing us that.